a week before this happened, there was a seminar in Derna itself on the consequences of neglect of the dam. And that was alerting people to the risks of collapse. Many of the people who attended that have now disappeared or been found dead.
More than 11,300 people are now known to have died after the floods in Libya, with around 10,000 people still missing. In Derna, that's the worst hit city, entire homes and businesses were swept into the ocean by the currents after 2 dams burst on Sunday. One UN official called the deaths avoidable after flash flooding hit the port city of Derna early this week. Peter Millett is a former UK ambassador to Libya and joins us now. Peter, good morning.
Good morning.
The devastation is almost undescribable that we've been hearing. What contact have you had with people on the ground about how help is being distributed to people who, the situation is desperate?
All want to help. What we're finding is Libyan people are coming together in solidarity with their fellow citizens in Derna and the other towns in the east. They want to help, but they are finding it very difficult to work out how to help. There's also many Libyans in this country and Libyan companies here who want to try and help, and finding ways in which how to provide that help. I think the Red Cross, the Red Crescent are good organizations for doing that. But it's a remote part of Libya, very difficult to access, and getting in there and knowing exactly what is needed is also one of the main problems.
Are you nervous about the rescue efforts sort of being hampered? We've heard from the International Crisis Group, who said there's currently on the ground very little coordination between rescuers, so it's not clear who's in charge.
I think the political divisions in Libya are clearly making this difficult. Just as in the last 10 years, the lack of investment in infrastructure is probably one of the causes. You mentioned that this was avoidable. It was certainly predictable. The storm Daniel had wreaked havoc in Greece. It was predictable that large amounts of rain were going to lead to flash flooding. The city should have been evacuated in advance.
Clearly, there's going to be explanation to why it was that dam failed. Both of them failed. From what your experience has shown, is how much confidence do you have that any sort of the right type of appropriate inspections of these type of infrastructure would have been taking place?
I think part of the legacy of 42 years of rule by Gaddafi is one, the lack of real institutions. Gaddafi hollowed out government institutions. So a sort of warning system or institutions that could have warned people just didn't have the training, the capability, the capacity to do the warning necessary. And also just the lack of infrastructure investment. Large amounts of Libya is a wealthy country. It produces 1.2 million barrels a day. The money comes into the central bank. Large amounts of that money is paid in salaries and in subsidies. The amount of money allocated for investment in infrastructure and development projects, not just dams, but schools, hospitals and so forth, has been very limited in the last few years.
What is absolutely tragic here is there's a researcher who warned in a Libyan science journal in November of the threat facing the city of Derna, particularly because of the dams. You know, that is galling to say that there were, even if it was a small body of people who were trying to raise an alarm to say this needs urgent attention.
And a week before this happened, there was a seminar in Derna itself on the consequences of neglect of the dam. And that was alerting people to the risks of collapse. Many of the people who attended that have now disappeared or been found dead.
That is unbelievable.
It is.
Dr. Leslie Mabon, I want to give you their words. As lecturer in environment systems at the Open University, said that while extreme weather was becoming more frequent and unpredictable, and you talked about the weather we'd seen in Greece, he'd said it was social, political and economic factors that determined who was at greatest risk. I'll give you the quote here. "The events that are unfolding in Libya are a reminder there is no such thing as a natural disaster." Do you agree that so much of this could have been mitigated against?
Yes, I think it shows that in places where there is conflict, where there are political divisions, where the people don't have sufficient voice, that makes dealing with climate change, environmental change, even economic reform that much more difficult. I mean, the political class in Libya have been hanging on to power, but they have not been implementing the necessary economic changes which are not necessary in any country to deal with employment, to deal with better services for citizens, but also to dealing with major issues like climate change.
The challenge now is to do that, to execute all of that, is made so much more difficult after this disaster.
Yes, it's one of the debates going on is whether this is going to make it easier or harder to reach a political settlement, because with divided institutions, if those divisions continue, it's going to make the stability of Libya even harder. And with the instability south of Libya, in Mali, in Niger, in Chad, in Sudan, the pressure of instability. And Libya is a country within 300 miles of the southern flank of NATO. It has Russian mercenaries and Wagner Group fighters on the ground. It is one of the main sources of migration into Europe. It's a petri dish for terrorism. We need to help to bring stability and future prosperity to this country.
What do you think would help to do that?
More visible intervention by the United Nations. Mediation is what I mean rather than intervention. Mediation by the United Nations. They have a special envoy on the ground. All the agencies are there. But the UK government, with the United States, with Germany, with France, can play a big role with the neighbouring countries to bring them together to press for elections, but also free and fair elections, which can be used to bring the country together, reconciliation among Libyans. That's what we're finding at personal level. The citizens of Libya are coming together to work to help the people in Derna. There needs to be a system of reconciliation between those people and pressure on the politicians to allow elections to happen.
Peter Millett, thank you so much. Former UK ambassador to Libya, speaking to us on Times Radio Breakfast.